Hey yogis, welcome to our tutorial on Chaturanga Dandasana. I know you're all excited to be here. Woo, woo. Let's get going. So Chaturanga Dandasana is four-limbed staff pose, and you will be familiar with it because we move through our sun salutations A and B, and this is like the link in that flow that gets us down to the earth and back up again. So from your downward facing dog, from plank pose through to Urdhva Mukha and back to downward facing dog. The other thing it does is that we use it as a vinyasa, so a connection to continue to build heat in the body and strength in the upper body. And you will notice that we use this through the flows. So say for example we're in three-legged dog and then we move through a vinyasa, Chaturanga Dandasana, back into downward facing dog, and then we can switch sides to the other leg. So it is used a lot, so it's really important that we figure out how to actually do this. The shoulder joint is super duper complex. It's the most complex joint in the body, so it's my job as a leader and an inspirer of and sharer of yoga to make sure that you know as much as you can and that you practice safely so that you can protect this enormously complex joint. I'm not going to go back too much into the anatomical details, but what I do want to do is give you the details of how to move through safely in this practice. So, without further ado, our Chaturanga or four-limbed staff pose we often refer to as plank pose. So in coming into plank, our hands are going to be planted just outside of the shoulders. And the reason that they're not directly under the shoulders, so in tabletop here they're directly under the shoulders, and in arm balances a lot of the time under the shoulders. See this movement here, I'm bending into the elbows, but my entire chest and these little puppies here, they kind of get in the way. So what we want to do is have them just slightly outside of the shoulders, so that way we've got somewhere to move. So just test that out, test where that hand space is for you. And a really great tip here is to, if you're keen, get a felt tip pen, marker on the mat, masking tape, mark little crosses where your hands go. I'm pretty lucky here because my mat has a little bit of patterning and you might be able to see that. I've also been practicing long enough that my body is familiar with where it needs to go when I come into that space. But even through practice, you might still see me make those micro adjustments. So putting tape, masking tape down there. If you're gung-ho, you can draw texture on your mat. There's no rules around like having pictures on your mat. You might put a little message here saying, I love you self at the top of your mat. Whatever works for you, right? So hands outside the shoulders. Hands are like starfish, my favorite animal. Just remember it, starfish the hands. So spread the fingers as far apart as you can. You're going to plant those babies down into the earth. So as we come into our plank pose, the feet step back and we press through the heels. So the heels are going towards the back of the mat. The energy is drawing from the crown of the head all the way back into that heel. And we step back, here we are in plank pose. My gaze is slightly forward. I'm going to engage the core. So I'm lifting my belly towards the spine, but I'm also shortening this distance between the ribs and the hips. So you can see that kind of action there where I'm shortening that distance and I'm engaging the deep core. I'm pressing my hands into the earth and I'm going to start to dome up through the shoulders. So I'm going to turn my back to you here and just explain. These are my shoulder blades, and you can see them when I do that. This is retraction of the shoulders, and this is protraction. So I'm creating space. And you can see when I do this, I've created space between my shoulders here. That's the sensation that you want to have in your plank pose. And you get this by pushing down and lifting and separating the shoulders. And you can see that action as I move into that space that I press that away. You almost get this sensation of the shoulder blades wrapping down towards the armpits. So they're pushing down into this space. And that, my friends, is protraction of the shoulder blades. And that's as complex as I'm going to get into those anatomical references here. So the net is hands slightly outside of the shoulders, heels pressing back, belly to spine, press the earth away, gaze forward. If you're gazing down here, straight down at the mat, I know that feels like the spine is straight, but we want to create a little bit of length here. So I'm going to get you to gaze forward 2 or 3 feet, just beyond the edge of your mat. Now, Chaturanga Dandasana. I'm just going to show you the full variation here. I'm going to shift my body weight forward. I'm going to bring my elbows into my ribs, press forward through the feet and lift up to Urdhva Mukha. Exhale and press back. Downward facing dog. So let's break that down into some little bits and pieces. We've already talked about our plank pose. I'm going to drop down to the knees here. What we want to do is build strength in the upper body. In our Chaturanga Dandasana, and there's a couple of different ways to do this, but I feel like when you're beginning out on your yoga journey, this is probably the best way. And if anyone wants some more advanced tutorials on this, please send me messages through the Facebook group, and I'm certainly happy to post some extra practice in there for you. The elbows, as they bend, we want them to come and tuck into the side body, into the ribs here. So just think elbows, ribs, elbows, ribs. As you come down, the body's like an ironing board. My gaze is still forward, and my elbows are coming into my ribs. I'm going to lower down, and you can see my elbows are at right angles, and then I'm going to press back up. So elbows at right angles tells me that I've got my chest down to the floor as low as I want to go, and I don't want to go any further than that, because what happens then is you start to sink into the shoulder, and you can collapse all the way down onto the floor. There are safe ways of getting down there, and we're going to work through those today, rather than sagging into the shoulders, putting all the strain up into the shoulder joint. So what we're going to do is build that core strength in that push-up, and we're going to build strength in the arms, particularly in the bicep and tricep. So tricep, this little guy here, bicep, this guy at the back here. So we're on our knees, my hands, palms are pressed, and I'm going to elbows into the ribs. I get to 90 degrees, I'm gazing forward, and I'm going to inhale and lift. I'm going to do that one more time. Exhale, I've got my hover for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale and lift. So you can do that push-up to build strength for your Chaturanga Dandasana every single day of the week. And you start to build strength in this space, and full Chaturanga will come. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen, right? So body stays like an ironing board, engage the core, elbows into the ribs, and you're going to hover here. So the next part of this expression of this posture is Bhujangasana, cobra pose. So we're going to lift up here. So the hips stay down towards the earth here. Now I've got a slight bend in my elbows, and that's my personal adjustment in this space, because I want to draw the shoulders down the back. My chin is slightly towards the chest, but my heart space is lifting forward. So if I lift up all the way into the shoulders, you can see that my hips lift up off the earth. And where my knees are and my hips are, I feel like this is a more comfortable expression for me. If you're a little bit more bendy in the back, you might be able to lengthen and straighten through the arms while still drawing the shoulders down the back, and that's your cobra or Bhujangasana pose. You can tuck the toes here, hips back over the heels, and lift into downward facing dog from there. So that is one variation of Chaturanga Dandasana. So if you're in like those earlier phases and you want to build strength into that space, I encourage you to use that push-up style, with the dropping of the knees, which some people call half Chaturanga. The dropping of the knees, elbows to 90, the chest doesn't hit the floor, and then you slide forward and move into your Bhujangasana or cobra pose. So I'm going to demonstrate now that same flow. So we come into plank from our step back into plank. I'm going to drop the knees, elbows into the ribs, my chest comes down, my elbows are at 90. I inhale forward to my cobra pose, and if I want to lift into Urdhva Mukha, which is my upward facing dog, my feet here press into the mat, I lift the knees, and I can lift a little bit higher. So you can see my knees are lifted here, my feet are pressing into the earth, I've switched on my glutes, and I'm using the hands, palms into the mat to draw my heart space forward. The final step here is the gaze up towards the sky. Rolling over my toes, hips lift, heels ground, drop the head, and we're back in Urdhva Mukha, downward facing dog. So that's the shift that I would use from half or like that half Chaturanga through to Bhujangasana. And if you want to test your Urdhva Mukha, your upward facing dog, you can press the top of the feet into the mat, lift the knees and lift the hips from there, the front of the hips. So let's look at that one more time. From our plank pose, hands, palms are planted. We've got that ironing board feel right through the body. My heels and head are drawing in opposites to each other. So my head gazing forward, heels driving backwards. I'm going to lower the knees, keep that sensation of an ironing board or a plank. Elbows into the ribs, don't drop past 90. Inhale, cobra pose. If you want to test your Urdhva Mukha, lift up, lock into the knees, lifting the kneecaps, the quadriceps, and gently gaze towards the sky, rolling over into downward facing dog from here. So that's variation 1 of Chaturanga Dandasana. We're going to move into full Chaturanga now. As I said, if you're wanting to build strength in the area, we can do some work with blocks and all sorts of things. Just send me a note and I'll be able to send you a video or post a video in the Facebook group on that. But let's move into full Chaturanga now. So we've got from our hands, palms plant, step back into plank. And you'll always hear that instruction, step back into plank. So from here, all the same things apply. Protraction of the shoulder blades, so you're lifting up and out here, belly to spine. And my heels are back, my gaze is slightly forward. From here, I want you to find a gentle rock forward and backwards. So this rock here, you can see my shoulders are coming forward of my hands. And there's a really good reason for this. If I stay here, when I come into Chaturanga, I've got kind of nowhere to go. And then I can't lift and come forward, right? So it gets a bit sloppy and you get things like this. Like that swaying or that scooping through. When I see that in class, that tells me that there's not enough strength in the upper body to carry you through Chaturanga. So in preference to doing that sweeping move, go back to half Chaturanga, drop the knees down to the earth, build strength in the upper body. Nothing to stop you, lifting some weights, doing some stretching and different bits and pieces to build strength in there. But my preference is that you don't sway through Chaturanga because it's potential for injury there. So, full Chaturanga. Hands are just outside the shoulders, hands, palms planted. We're in our plank pose. We've got this shift forward and back, right? Come back to your plank pose. I want you to feel that shift forward and stay forward. Hold here. As you go to exhale, elbows into the ribs, elbows to 90 only, and this is your Dandasana, staff pose. Inhale, roll over the toes, Urdhva Mukha. Exhale back, Ardha Mukha. And breathe. So you can see the difference there in that Chaturanga. Hands, palms plant, step back into plank. You can practice like this all day long. It's just going to build strength. My recommendation is you do 5 or 10, stop, take a break, do something else, and then add on the next day. Don't exhaust the body. But a good way to start to build strength here is to find that strength in plank, maybe hold 30 seconds. So, that subtle shift forward. Exhale, elbows to the ribs, elbows to 90 only. Press into the feet, lift up, Urdhva Mukha. You can see my knees are lifted, my thighs are lifted, my feet are pressing into the earth. Exhale, roll back, Ardha Mukha, downward facing dog, and rest. So, that is your Chaturanga. Chaturanga Dandasana means four-limbed staff pose. And the reason it's four-limbed is because you've got your hands and the feet on the earth. Dandasana is your staff, and so that's that ironing board-like or plank-like position that we hold during Chaturanga Dandasana. That movement of Chaturanga that we refer to so often through our vinyasa practice is essential in building heat and the connection through our vinyasa flow. So don't ignore this part of your practice because it can be a particularly challenging part of the practice, but it's also something that once you start to build that strength, it becomes such a beautiful, invigorating part of your practice, and I really can't tell you, like, as I move through my vinyasa and that chaturanga, like, I just know that, like, I'm on this journey, and I'm progressing and changing and evolving, and every time I take that, I know it's a little bit of an addition of strength and tenacity and application into my practice. And I think that's why I love chaturanga so much. And I know that many of you are going, I don't love chaturanga, and I didn't love it either. And now, you know, all these years later, I'm like, oh, chaturanga. I think when you've done as many of them as I have, there are yogis out there who've done way more. So, recap. Entry-level chaturanga. Hands, palms, press into the earth. Protract through the shoulder blades, so that little doming of the shoulder blades, belly to spine. If you're training strength here, you can use this push-up. Knees to the earth, gaze forward, elbows into the ribs, elbows to 90. Inhale, Bhujangasana, or you can lift up to Urdhva Mukha, and then press back to downward facing dog. Coming into full chaturanga, we take our plank pose, we shift the body weight forward, elbows to ribs, 90 degrees only, press through the feet and lift up into Urdhva Mukha. Exhale, lift the hips, press back, Ardha Mukha. And that, my friends, is your tutorial on Chaturanga Dandasana. Happy chaturangaing, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.